Good evening. Good evening. I'm Larry Souter, and welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. We're coming to you from Bixter Chapel, the Madison Church of Christ in Madison, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us online, being a part of our live audience. And if you are in the Madison, Tennessee, Nashville area, come visit us on the first Wednesday of the month right here in Bixter Chapel at the Madison Church of Christ. We're glad to have you. Theme scripture comes from Romans 8:38 through 39. I am sure that nothing can separate us from God's love. Not life or death, not angels or spirits, not the present or the future, not powers above or powers below. Nothing in all creation can separate us from God's love for us in Christ Jesus our Lord. What does a church do when its preacher retires, quits, or is fired? Jerry says when a preacher stays a long time, usually the church doesn't like the next preacher. Since 2007, Jerrie Barber has volunteered to be the next preacher they don't like. Jerry has served as interim preacher for 10 churches in Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, and Missouri. He started preaching at the age of 16 and is married to the former Gail Champion, who you met on a previous Stories of Amazing Grace. Besides being a preacher, Jerry is also a barefoot runner, bicyclist, a ventriloquist with cousin Zeke from Coon Creek, and a blogger and podcaster. His latest podcast is Gleaning Mustard Seeds. And you'll meet Jerrie Barber right after this video highlighting Jerry running barefoot.
You live in this West Nashville neighborhood. You've seen the runner.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Absolutely. Who hasn't?
I've not had the conversation about why he does it.
So what is it that's got everyone's attention about runner Jerrie Barber?
They usually say, "Sir, do you realize you don't have any shoes on?" And I say, "I knew I left something at home." Well, yeah, it's a little weird. People say, "How do you run barefoot?" Well, you take off your shoes and you take off your socks and you just start going.
Have you ever joined them for some barefoot running?
No offense, never.
I'm 79 years old. Since March of 2010, I've been running barefooted, and if I felt better when I was 20, I can't remember.
Jerrie runs barefoot 15 miles most weeks, often here on Charlotte Pike. He's heard from a lot of concerned people.
Thinking I might have to run away from assisted living. I've had more than one person offer to buy me shoes.
But plenty of others know
He's famous around these parts.
He always hollers at me and my doggies.
that's just Jerrie.
Red hat, red pants, yeah, that's that weird preacher that runs barefoot when it's 50 degrees and above.
Jerrie's preached at many churches since he was 16. Still does guest speaking.
And it is rewarding to go in and see people without hope learn to have hope again and learn how to better relate to other people and to God. Turn around 1/10 of a mile.
And since Jerrie loves conversation, barefoot running is a way to get people talking. He does love it. It's partly a throwback to his childhood when he ran everywhere barefoot.
People say, "Doesn't that hurt?" And I said, "Absolutely."
But he says that part's worth it for this exercise, for his health.
Life is painful, and if all we do is try to stay comfortable, we'll be a failure.
It's part of life, correct?
Anything you set your mind to do, you can do it.
When you have friends that are watching and supporting, I find I do better. That's true of races, or if I'm running with somebody else. That's another matter for life. We need to have good friends that encourage.
Truth is, when Jerrie thinks of all the people who stop and check in on him to make sure he's okay, he doesn't mind that. Those are caring people.
You know, a lot of people say it's really dangerous out there. People have been very, very kind to me. People are just kind.
Watch for pedestrians. You might like who you meet. I'm Forrest Sanders, News Channel 5.
Please welcome Jerrie Barber. Come on up. Have a seat. Did you run today, barefoot?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
But if it gets too cold, you won't run.
I don't run barefooted if it's 49 degrees and below.
I got you. We got some pictures here. Let's take a look at this first one here with the t-shirt. I'm okay. I'm not lost. I own the shoes. Don't call 911. Have you had some experiences along that line?
One of the two most interesting conversations I've ever had in my life, a year ago, October 17. I was doing my 6-mile run. I was about a mile away from the house, and I looked up, and there's an army green SUV. And as I get closer, I look, and she's not turning into the subdivision. Nobody's coming this way, nobody's coming that way. And I get a little closer, she got a phone, and she does like this. And she said, "Sir, do you know where you're going?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, 756 Woodland Way, that's where I live." She said, "Are you lost?" I said, "I once was lost, but now I'm found." She says, "Does anybody know where you are?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. My wife has an iPad, and she keeps up with me on Find My Friends pretty well 24 hours a day." And she said, "Do you need a ride?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I'm getting exercise. If I got in the car and started riding with you, I wouldn't be getting any exercise." So I thought I had her converted, and I was going down the road, and about a quarter mile, I look around, she's turned around and she's watching me. I said, "That lady's going to Western Hills Church of Christ. She's going to park in the driveway, see if I turn in." And she does. I talked to her again. I said, "It's a little weird. Police stop me in every town." And she says, "Well, I apologize." I said, "No, ma'am, you don't have anything to apologize for. You are very, very kind. And if we had more people like you in the world, we'd be a lot better off." So I turned into my driveway, start going up the hill, police car pulls up.
Wow.
I said, "You got a call?" He said, "I got 2. I noticed he had an iPad on the dashboard, and it had the 2 police reports. And white male, red hat, red pants, black shirt, running down Charlotte Avenue with no shoes, said he once was lost, but now he's found. Complainant thinks he may have dementia. The second one came in 4 minutes later, and this one said, the complainant thinks he may have run away from an assisted living home. Matthew Hyatt is my friend. I was on his podcast and told this story, so he bought that T-shirt. So that maybe save a little time. I'm okay. I'm not lost. I own shoes. Don't call 911.
Yeah. Next picture, you're running at Nissan Stadium. What's this all about?
That is wonderful. That's a Tom King half marathon. I've run that 6 or 8 times, I guess. You start out in the parking lot at the stadium, go out through Shelby Bottoms, and then you come into the stadium, run the length of the field, the end of the field, end up on the 50-yard line, and there I am on the Jumbotron.
And you got a picture of you showing your feet here. How are your feet holding up?
That is another story. I started in 2010. That winter I read some books. And I started planning. Part of my podcast is on the mustard seed principle. Don't do too much too quick. Try not to learn very much, but try to get a mustard seed that'll make a difference. So I started setting the rules. I don't like to go out every morning and say, well, I wonder if I need a coat or not. So I said, okay. At that time, I said 39 degrees and below is shoes. 40 in the 40s, I'll put on a long sleeve shirt, 50 and above, short sleeve shirt. Well, that worked out pretty well, and I thought the next year I'll do 34, and that worked fine. And then I read a book that said, this man said he ran in snow and ice in sub-zero temperatures without any shoes. And I said, if he can do it, I can do it. I was preparing for a half marathon, and I was doing a 9-mile run, and it was 17 degrees above zero, and the wind was blowing hard. And I got back and got in the shower, and my feet were purple. I lost a layer of skin, and I decided to go back to 39 degrees. And since I've gotten older, I have upped it to 59 degrees, or 49 degrees, so.
We got you a shot of you running in the snow, but you don't run in the snow barefooted.
No.
No.
That's on the Big 4 bridge. That's probably the most comfortable, enjoyable place I've ever run. We were in Jeffersonville, Indiana for a year and a half doing an interim. That bridge was built in 1895. It was refurbished in 1929. It went out of use in 1968. And the cities of Louisville and Jeffersonville refurbished it, and it is a biking, running, walking bridge now. And so I was running that morning, just about daylight, and there was a man right in the middle, and he was just clicking pictures. And I got up, and he started asking me questions. He was from one of the local newspapers. I ran, came back. Man's about the same place, but he's from the newspaper on the other side. And so I made both newspapers on both sides of the river that day.
And you also do some biking?
Yes, got a bike from Western Auto, a 24-inch bike when I was 6, 7 years old.
You know they're out of business now, don't you?
They are out of business. And then I rode until I had a bike wreck on May the 19th, 1976. It 8 stitches and pulled my shoulder down to here. And so I took off 21 years. And then I decided I want to ride again. I'd always wanted to ride to Alabama on a bicycle on the Natchez Trace. And so I was shopping, and I was looking at a cruiser bike, no gears. I cannot understand why anybody would want to ride on a razor blade. That gets very uncomfortable, those narrows. And they told me, they said, you can't ride that far on one of these bikes. I said, why not? They said, well, they're not made for it. I said, how far can I run on one of those, or ride on one of those? And they said, oh, about 10 miles. I said, okay, you're telling me if I buy this bike, I can ride 10 miles? I said, yeah. I said, I'll do that 10 times, and I'll be in Alabama, and that's all I want to do. So while I was preaching at Barry's Chapel, we just announced we want to go. And the first time, 32 people got with us on that. It's not a race. If you get tired, have a breakdown, we got people picking you up. And so we did 8 centuries down the Natchez Trace. And I kept telling people, when I get to be an old man of 60, I'm saving my money, I want to get one with gears. And 5 years ago, I woke up and I said, Gail, I'm 14 years behind on that goal. So I started shopping. I now have a cruiser that has 7 gears in the hubs with a coaster brake.
Very good.
I ride 28 miles, try to do that once a week in good weather. And I go over to Old Charlotte, Pond Creek, over to Teeter's Market and eat something real good to get enough energy to get back home.
Speaking of your youth, tell me what you learned at Harper's Store.
Harper's Store.
Harper's Store.
Yeah, Harbor Store, Centerville, Tennessee, right off the square. It was the 3rd year that I'd walked around every store on the square to try to get a job. And the reason I needed a job is I wanted a Shetland pony with a bridle and a saddle. And I did a little calculation. My only source of income was a quarter every time I mowed the yard, and it was going to take a long time. So this is my 3rd time, and everybody turned me down. But as I was leaving, Miss Harbor came out and she said, little Jerry, do you really want to work? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, be here at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I learned so much working there. I worked there 3 years. First time I bagged groceries, I noticed that box of rolls would fit just right down in the bottom. It did. Man, that was neat. And I started putting the corn and the beans and the peaches. And they said, little Jerry, you need to put bread and stuff on the top. Well, I didn't do that anymore. I learned from that. And so there's so many things that I learned. I learned that banana pudding baby food is not good.
Really?
As I was stocking one day, I noticed it was cheap, and I thought of Mama's banana pudding, but I didn't do that anymore. So there's so many things I learned not to do. I felt incompetent the first day I got there. I was stacking Coca-Cola bottles, and I thought, man, this is too much for me. I found that recurring feeling when I went to my first church, when I went to the second church, which was twice as big as that, when I went to the third church, which was twice as big as that. What am I doing here? I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. So I learned, one of the things I tell people in interim churches, if you hire a 22-year-old preacher, you're going to get a 22-year-old preacher. And you need to understand that. But if you're kind, like the Harbors were, you can really influence. And so those lessons I learned at 11, 12, 13, 14 have been with me for a long time.
You started preaching at age 16.
16.
Was it just a natural thing for you in your
Well,
blood?
Mother and Daddy were just good folks. They never told me I ought to preach or anything, but we never missed a service. They were very conservative. They made me wear shoes on Sunday morning, but I could go barefoot on Sunday night and Wednesday night, so that was helpful. Daddy is a good man, but he didn't like to fish or hunt. Ward Mayberry moved next door to us. He worked for the National Guard, and he was our preacher. He hunted and fished, and he'd invite me every time. And one day, in the winter of 1961, he said, Jerry, when I go to National Guard camp, we shouldn't have to pay anybody to preach for me. You'd preach one Sunday night, wouldn't you? And, you know, everybody take it, yes, sir, I'll do that. About March, he said, hey, you coming? I said, well, I've been thinking about it. He said, come on over. And he helped me with a sermon. His wife, Idell, typed it out. I preached June 18, 1961, and I've missed very few Sundays since then. The next month, I went down to Lower Sulphur, where Daddy was raised. I preached. They said, would you come back once a month? And then there was Wolf Creek and Beaver Dam Springs. And so during my junior and senior year, I'd get one sermon and go to 3 churches each month. So that's the way I got started.
Interim ministry. Why do we need interim ministers? These are some of the churches that you have been an interim minister. We got 2 more spots here. You're going to fill these up pretty soon?
Well, I don't know. You know, I think I'm getting crankier in my old age and putting more stuff in the contract.
But this is Missouri, Nashville, Laverne, Indiana,
Kentucky, Hendersonville,
Missouri,
College Side and Cookville, Laverne, Murray City, Tennessee, Northside, Jeffersonville, Shady Acres and Saxton. That's an interesting story. I was in Jeffersonville and they called and they said, we think we may need your service. I thought, Saxton, Missouri, that's the other side of the Mississippi River. That's probably too far. But I set up an appointment. That's what they were doing, to talk to the elders on Thursday night. And as soon as I got off, I checked it, and it was only 15 minutes further driving time than Jeffersonville. So when they called on Thursday, I said, I'd pretty well decide to forget it. Thought it was too far. But I said, it's only 15 minutes further. And since you all have Lamberts there, I'm going to knock off 15 minutes. And so we went there, Central McMinnville, and then River Road, which that was a year we got to live in our own house. A mile and a half from where we live.
And what does an interim minister do?
What most people really want. Preacher's been here 20, 25 years. They want the elders to get on the ball. Let's have a going away party from our preacher this Sunday. And let's bring in the next preacher next Sunday. And then wonder why everybody didn't like him. Nothing wrong with him, and we could name names if we wanted to, but regardless, the rule of thumb is, according to the Interim Minister Network, in my experience, after a long-term minister, 5 years or more, you'll have an interim, either intentional or unintentional. I've tried it both ways. Intentional is a lot more fun. And there is a grief process. They say, well, can you speed it up? My observation is you can get 9 women and put them on the job. It's going to take each one of them about 9 months to have a baby. You can't speed up process. And so during that time, they have an opportunity to grieve the loss of the last preacher and gain wisdom on how to select the next preacher.
And you offer some tips along this line as well.
I talk from a dime I get there. I say the first week or two, we're not ready to look for a preacher. We're going to look at ourselves. Are we the kind of church that a really good preacher would look forward to working with? Am I the kind of person that would recruit a good preacher? And then we do surveys, transition monitoring team. We tap into the grapevine of the church. What are people saying? What are people asking? What are people fearing? What are people losing? What hopes and dreams do they have? And so we go through that process. I do leadership training, 2 leadership training courses.
Do they ask you to stay on?
Yes, every time.
But you say no?
I think most of the time they're just being nice. We were at Hendersonville. We've been there 3 months. And an older lady, probably not as old as I am now, but an older lady came up and she got an elder and she said, I want you to hear this. She said, Jerry, when you came here, I was determined I was not going to like you. Keith Parker's my favorite preacher, and I said, I'm not going to like you. But you and Gail are here now, and I like you. And for the last 2 weeks, I have been praying that you would be our next preacher. Is that a sin? I said, absolutely not. 1 John 5 says this is the confidence we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. You can ask for anything you want to, as long as you want God's will more than you do what you want. And now I said, if God granted that request, you'd have a lying preacher. And I don't know how you deal with that, because I signed a contract that I will not consider or be considered as the next preacher.
How long are you typically there?
6 to 18 months is a contract.
6 to 18 months.
2 churches wanted to go through an elder search before the preacher search, and so we put another 6 months on those 2.
You've been around to a lot of churches. What is the future of Christianity in this country, you think?
Well, of course, the observation is it's declining. Our culture's changing.
And why is that? The culture's changing, but what's prompting all that? COVID?
Well, COVID was tough. Let me tell you, my opinion, the worst thing we lost during COVID, Lord's Supper. Gail and I were at a church probably about a year ago. Maybe I shouldn't have been peeping, but I was. They offered thanks for the bread and gave us 7 seconds to examine ourselves and to reflect on the greatest event that ever happened. And then they offered thanks for the fruit of the vine, and we had another 7 seconds before we start writing out our check and get the contribution going. Horrible. We got churches that they offer thanks for both of them at the same time. It's kind of like the potluck. Going away preacher, new preacher. One church had both potlucks the same day. You say one potluck that way. And I think that's essentially what we've been doing. I have a ritual that I've done for decades. I count to 7 twice. During the bread, I think of 1 Lord, 2 thieves, 3 crosses, 4 soldiers, 5 wounds, 6 hours, 7 sayings. And then during the fruit of the vine, I go through those 7 sayings. Not a way in the world you can do that in 7 seconds. So that's my COVID concern.
How much do you pay an interim preacher?
Well, one of the neat things, when I interviewed at Hendersonville, they were talking, and I told them, I said, brethren, I think I'm one of the 10 best interim ministers in the churches of Christ. As far as I could tell, only 3 preachers had been for training. The Interim Ministry Network started in 1981, and they trained people to help with transition. I said, only 3 have been through training, and surely I'm in the top 10 since I've been trained. But being new, you can kind of make up your own rules. And so I got to thinking, what would be fair? And so what I tell people when we get to that, I was talking to some elders, this is my seal of anonymity, less than 50 years ago and less than 500 miles where we're sitting. That's the second question the man asked me, how much is it going to cost to get you? And I said, I'm not ready to talk about that. I said, we may not even like each other. We don't need to waste a lot of time talking about insurance, Social Security, and all that other stuff. But I came up with this, with this idea, pay me what you paid the last preacher. And that seems to work. Small church, first church I went, they said, we paid our last preacher $300 a week, house and utilities. I said, okay, I'll do it. I want to live here, but don't want to move here. We live out in West Nashville, up behind the football field at Nashville Christian. So I said, you furnish everything. We'll live in the house, but I don't like to lift heavy furniture. And so we had 4 cups and 4 spoons and 4 forks. And I said, you can go to yard sales, whatever you want. One of the elders' wives said, I have a hide-a-bed that belonged to my mother. And you all can borrow that to use while Jerry's here. If you'll promise me you'll never bring it back to my house again. About 2 weeks later, we spent the night with some friends that had a small bed that sagged in the middle. And Gail and I discussed, how would you like to sleep on that 18 months? So I called one of the elders and I said, down at this truck stop, there will be a truck that will have an interim bed on it. And so we bought us a king-size foam mattress, and that is our interim bed that travels with us.
The date, Sunday, December 19, 1976 at 10:20 a.m. What happened?
I don't keep records or anything, but people ask me, how do you remember all that stuff? When I took Dale Carnegie 5 times, they told us, I tell people I flunked out and kept having to go back. They say our memories improve by exaggeration, color, movement, and pain. You can go by a particular place for years, but you have a blowout and go smack dab into that tree, you'll remember that tree for the rest of your life. It was decent. Well, you gave the date. I had just taught Bible class, and one of the elders, very calm, said, Brother Jerry, would you step in the office just a minute? And I said, yes, sir. He said, Brother Jerry, I think you ought to think about resigning today. I looked at my notes. I've been studying all week, and I didn't have that anywhere in my notes. Well, I walked into the auditorium, and the first song we sang is Anywhere Is Home. I preached, went home, told Gail I'd been fired, went to the deacon's house and cried all afternoon, came back and preached that night and started looking for a place to preach. So I came up with this blog post and it's also one of my podcast episodes, The Best Day of the Week to Fire Your Preacher.
Which is?
Well, this is obviously an opinion. I hadn't done a survey, but I think Monday night would be the best night. You got 2 days to recover before Wednesday and 6 before the next Sunday. I definitely think that between Bible study and worship, when you got to preach, is not the best time.
3 ways I helped get myself fired. What are those 3 ways?
Well, I was devastated. It was horrible. That was the winter of 1976-77. Blizzard after blizzard after blizzard came through. For 30 days, we did not see the pavement on our parking lot, and we were running around with 2 little kids trying to find a job. I was a victim. We had 2 elders. That man fired me and didn't even talk to the other elder. As soon as it was over, I went to the other elder. I said, when did y'all decide to fire me? He said, what are you talking about? And I said, when did y'all decide to fire me? He said, I have no idea. And I called him. I said, he told me I needed to resign. He didn't know anything about it. So obviously I was right and they were wrong. I do some of my best Bible study when I'm running. I refused to listen to anything. Gail was going to buy me a Walkman when I started running. I said, no, that's my silent time. And it just kind of jogs thinking. And I got to thinking about 6 or 7 years later, why in the world, what had happened? Some people had complained. I'd preached some sermons they didn't like, and they complained to him. He was a new elder, only been an elder about 6 months. And somebody told him on a Saturday night, said, I think everything calmed down. If Jerry would find another place and just move on, I think we'd be fine. And so I'm sure he felt duty-bound as a new elder to convey that message to me. And I thought, why would they tell him rather than come in talking to me? And the answer I came up with is because I had communicated very clearly to people that anybody that works as hard as I do and as good a job as I do shouldn't be criticized. And I expected perfection from myself and everybody else, and myself and everybody else didn't cooperate with that. And I got frustrated. About every 6 months I'd preach a mad sermon. And that'd probably wear on you after so long a time. And the third reason, so I didn't handle my anger well, I didn't want criticism, and I did not avail myself of somebody I could talk to and tell my pressure to. And so I think that generally if somebody is hurting me, I help them do it. And until I figure out that, or if I can't keep it from happening, If I didn't cooperate, how can I keep from that same thing happening to me again? If I go through a certain part of town every week for 3 weeks, and every time I go, I'm a victim of drive-by shooting, I better start finding another route or get some bulletproof glass. There's something I can do to make it less likely that that'll happen.
Popular blog post. I've got some titles here. Let me go through a couple of these, or one of them anyhow. Do you know of a sound congregation? Comment on that.
Well, I keep seeing this on Facebook. Do you know of a sound congregation here? Do you know of a sound congregation here?
What does that mean anyhow?
Well, I'm formulating that. What that would mean if I used it, I prefer not to use that language. It means that, do you agree with me on everything?
No.
That's a sound congregation to me.
I see.
If you agree with me on everything.
I see.
One of the things I like to do in most interim churches is teach 1 Corinthians. A lot of the churches I've been to have been hurt. Two splits, one 50% of the church left, another one 60% of the church left. And so I like to study 1 Corinthians. They had every problem in the book. Division, arrogant, fornication, not just plain old vanilla fornication, but the Gentiles wouldn't even put up with what was going on there. Man was living with his father's wife. They were taking each other to law. They had marriage problems. They had problems with spiritual, miraculous gifts. They was talking all at the same time, and part of the time nobody knew what they were saying. Nobody was interpreting. They were getting drunk during the Lord's Supper. And they were people that would talk out during Sunday school and say they didn't believe in the resurrection. You name it, they had every problem, doctrinal, moral, everything. And yet he addresses them as the church of God, which is at Corinth, to those who are sanctified in Christ Jesus, called to be saints. So, if you live 30 miles from Corinth, would you withdraw fellowship from them? And if Paul came and preached to them or wrote them a letter, would you have him in your congregation for a gospel meeting, or say he was an unsound preacher because he went to an unsound church? People often ask me, when is it good to start a new church? A lot of new churches start from fusses. Mm-hmm. I tell people, it's just my study, that you have scriptural authority to start another church for a reason other than evangelism, if you move to another section or reaching out to a new part of the population. But if it's for something other than evangelism, the church where you're going now ought to be meaner than Corinth and deader than Sardis. Because Corinth, they had everything. And Paul didn't say, I tell you what the problem is, those folks are hopeless. I'll just go out here and buy you a piece of land, start you a new church, and you'll have the sound church in Corinth and the unsound church. Sardis was dead. We talk a lot about dead churches. I don't think I can pronounce people dead. I think Jesus can. And the church at Sardis said, you have a name that you live, but you're dead. But you have a few, even in Sardis, who have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. John or Jesus didn't say, well, you need to start the live Sardis Church of Christ and leave the dead Sardis Church of Christ alone. Mm-hmm. I think we split too quick, and we label too quick. And so unless it's worse than Corinth and deader than Sardis, if I'm on vacation, we'll probably visit the Sunday we're in town.
Comments, questions? If not, we're going to switch gears.
Okay.
Tell me about ventriloquism before we bring out cousin Zeke.
Okay. Brother asked me before how long I've been doing that, and I told him I've been talking to dummies 69 years. When I was a boy, I watched Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. I was just intrigued by that. Mother and Daddy bought the Book of Knowledge. It was a cheap version of the World Book. And Paul Winchell had a 2-page article that told you how to do that, the beginner's alphabet and just some tips on how to do it. And so I asked for a dummy that year for Christmas, and I got him, and I've been talking to dummies ever since. Cousin Zeke is custom made by some fellows in California, and he's about the size of a 5-year-old.
And we're going to take a little break here right now, and we'll come back with you and Cousin Zeke. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerrie Barber and Cousin Zeke.
Cousin Zeke, it's good to be here tonight. I thought we'd just kind of check up and see how everybody down on Coon Creek's doing. How's your brother doing?
Yeah, he ain't doing too good. He's sick, got tapeworms.
Tapeworms? How'd he get tapeworms?
Been eating too much tape.
Why in the world would he do something like that?
Well, the doctor told him to eat something to stick to his stomach.
Well, Zeke, how's school going? How you and your teacher getting along?
Oh, she likes me. She really likes me.
Is that what she said?
No, she didn't say it exactly like that. Seth kept doing like it was now, I'd stay in the room another year.
Well, that's because you're not making good grades. You're failing.
I ain't done it neither. I made 100 on a test last week.
You made 100 on a test? How'd you do that?
I looked on Larry's test.
Zeke, you ought to be ashamed. You ought to be ashamed.
Oh, sorry.
No. I am sorry.
Oh, did you look on Larry's test too?
Your teacher told me something that I find it hard to believe, Zeke. She said that she saw you kick another boy right in the stomach. Zeke, did you do that?
Yeah, I did it, but it was an accident.
Zeke, how could it be an accident if you kicked another boy in the stomach?
He turned around too quick.
Zeke, you need to learn to control yourself. You need to think before you need to stop and think before you do something like that.
I did stop and think, and after I stopped and thought about it, I jumped on and eat the tar out of it.
See? Who was this boy?
Oh, that little snorted Johnny.
Johnny, he just comes up to right there on you.
Yeah, he comes up too often.
Zeke, did you hit him first?
No, I did not hit him first.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
No, I kicked him, then I hit him.
Well, what did this come up about anyhow?
Oh, I snorted. Johnny said I was drinking his Coca-Cola.
Well, Zeke, did you drink Johnny's Coca-Cola?
Yeah, I did. It was an accident.
Zeke, how could it be an accident if you drank Johnny's Coca-Cola?
I was gargling and let it slip.
Zeke, you're fibbing. You know, I wouldn't have thought of telling a fib like that when I was your age. You wouldn't know. It had never crossed my mind to tell a fib like that.
How old were you when you got started?
Let's see how you're doing in school. I'd like to hear you name all the presidents of the United States.
Oh, I can't do that. There's too many of them.
Well, when I was your age, I could name all the presidents of the United States.
Yeah. When you was my age, George Washington's the only one they had.
Okay, it's time for you to sing your song.
All righty, all ready? Hooray, the gang's all here, never on the leather, here we are together. Hooray, the gang's all here, sure I'm glad that you're here too.
Okay, Zeke, tell everybody so long.
No, I'm going to sing another song.
We hadn't practiced another song.
I know it. I'm going to do it all myself. You shut your mouth, and I'm going to sing another song.
Zeke, everybody knows if I close my mouth, you can't talk.
I can too, done it. I think I'm going out on my own.
Why would you want to do that? We've laughed and talked and had a good time. Do you want all these people to think I'm silly?
No, I don't want to think you're silly. Of course, you can't hide it always.
Okay, if that's what it takes to make you happy, you sing. Zeke, what do you call that song?
Silent Night. Y'all come to see me sometime, you hear?
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Now, you use Cousin Zeke in churches to teach the congregation?
You know, a lot of people would rather hear him preach than me. Yeah, Vacation Bible School and different things.
All over. How would you sum up your story of Amazing Grace? All these years of preaching and being in different churches and God being with you in your marriage. And
It is amazing. That was the most difficult day of my life, the day that I was fired. It was embarrassing. We'd been there 8 years. We grew, number-wise, it was the best church I'd ever did work with. We grew every year, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, contribution. We knocked on every door in town 3 times. Most of the people we were baptized were not just our children. We baptized our children, but we reached out, known well, built onto our building, grew from 200 to 300 during that time. Brother North was one of my heroes. Brother North said, here's what we're doing at Madison. Well, I'd just say, here's what we're doing at Madisonville. And so I just put that veil on it, and we came down and did a workshop here, spent the weekend, used to have those workshops here. And so my goal was to stay there till I died. And Brother North said, go to heaven from Madison. And I wanted to go to heaven from Madisonville. And so that just shattered my plans. But we finally found a church that would talk to a fired preacher, and we went to Dalton, Georgia, and spent 11 years there. Raised our children there. Recently, we went back. Since our last interim, Gail's book came out, and after it came out, we took time off to go back and visit all 15 churches, 5 full-time and 10 interim, give them a copy of Gail's book and my book. And when I presented, I said, I can tell you which one's the best. Gail sold more in the first month than I sold in 5 years. But we went back there, and our family was there. They had a special Sunday. So that was a great blessing. It's there that we met James Jones, who counseled Gail. James Jones was a fellow who helped me get those firing attitudes changed around. I was criticized very severely one Sunday. And part of our privilege, he rented our library for 5 hours free counseling a month. So I went in on that Monday and asked secretary, has James got any time? She said, yeah. I said, 2 o'clock. I said, I need it. I wanted him to do 2 things. One is to admit I was right and they were wrong. That was a slam dunk. I mean, there was no question about that. Secondly, I hoped but doubted if he would get around to these people. I was going to tell on them and tell them who they were. And he'd say, you know, Jerry works hard, does a good job. You shouldn't criticize him. It discourages him. So I told him my story, and he just sat there and looked at me. He said, did it ever occur to you that not everybody likes Jerrie Barber? Then I didn't say anything. That never occurred to me. I'm an only child, had a good, happy childhood, so I didn't say anything. He said, everybody does not like Jerrie Barber. Everybody didn't like Jerrie Barber yesterday. Everybody does not like Jerrie Barber today. Everybody will not like Jerrie Barber in the future. That's truth, that's reality, that's the way the world operates. You have 2 choices. You can let people know that you don't want to be criticized. And if you'll communicate to them, not many people will ever criticize you until they get ready to fire you. Fire me, man. Man, here comes December 19 right back at me again. I didn't like that one. Or he says, if you will let people know that you're really concerned about what they think and feel, a few people will tell you, and many times it will really hurt, but you'll learn things you'll never learn any other way. James was my mentor. We did workshops together. We had classes together. He counseled Gail through working through her early trauma, and he is largely responsible for the work that we've done since then. So that was powerful. One church, we had an elder who decided that I had too much power, and we talked about it, and I planned to retire at that place. Or I had a place where I was going to build a study out behind my house. Beautiful place to live. But we came to Nashville, learned about the Interim Ministry Network, spent 5 years West Nashville Heights, 14 years at Barry's Chapel, and man, that was great. So everything, I kind of believe that there's a philosophy that's good. All things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose.
And your life reflects that.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I want to close with something from your book. This is one of the chapters, or one of the pages, not a chapter, but a page or two, called Preacher Chain Letter. Are you familiar with that?
I use that in training for looking for a new preacher.
Dear Search Committee, this is a chain letter. The result of a computerized survey indicates that the perfect preacher preaches 15 minutes, condemns sin but never offends anyone, works from 8 a.m. till midnight, including janitorial work, makes $60 per week, wears good clothes, buys good books, drives a good car, and gives $50 per week to the poor. Is 28 years old and has been preaching for 30 years. Is wonderful and perfectly handsome, has a burning desire to work with teenagers, but spends all of his time with the older folks. Smiles with a straight face because his sense of humor keeps him seriously dedicated to his work. Makes 15 calls per day to the church family, shut-ins, and the hospitalized while evangelizing the lost. And is always in his office when needed. If your preacher does not measure up to this chain letter, send this letter to 6 other churches and send him to the church at the top of the list. In 1 year, you will receive 1,643 preachers. One of them should be perfect. Warning, keep this letter going. One church broke the chain and got their old preacher back in 6 months. Thank you for being with us. Take time this week to share your story of amazing grace with someone, and we'll see you next month on Stories of Amazing Grace. Thank you for being here. Thank you.